Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, people. Welcome to another episode of The Scholar and the Student. We are on camera again, and we are back in Palape. Today we are at Kgaswe International High School, and we are going to interview someone I've known for a very long time, someone who has a lot of wisdom to impart on everyone from all walks of life. At the moment, he is the former principal of Kgaswe International High School, Mr. Jannie Kleynhans. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
So if I am correct, you are almost retired. In your own words, you are 99.99% of the way there.
Yes, the 31st of December actually will bring to an end 49 years in education as a teacher and as an administrator.
Wow, that's I think that's longer than a lot of people have been alive. So how does that make you feel, having seen all these different changes in eras and different mentalities of people? I mean, you lived through apartheid as well, and now you can see the world seems to be turning in a different direction with the rise of Trump and what have you. So what's your take on that, if we can begin there?
Yes, of course, I've seen many changes. As you rightly said, I grew up in the apartheid era, and I grew up on the white side, if you wish, which was, of course, totally different for us than the international audience was experiencing, because most of the stuff that happened, of course, was kept away from us, not only from children, but the general public. And then I started teaching in 1971 in that era. So I saw the changes happening, and I also saw the changes happening in people's thinking processes, not accepting what the media or the government then wanted us to believe. And it led to some questions and some friction, I'm sure, in the minds of many people. But of course, we were quite helpless in a certain sense to do anything about it. But I had that privilege then to start teaching in those circumstances and saw things change, from my point of view, definitely for the better. So 1994 for me was a very, very special year, and I was still teaching in South Africa then at a predominantly white school, and then moved to Botswana in 1997, where things changed for me completely, because Botswana, as we all know, was not really affected directly by the apartheid era. And it was like a revelation for me to come here and discover that people can actually live in harmony, and people of different races, backgrounds, religions can get along very well. And since then, it's been a pleasure to have been here for the 1997, January. I think it's going on 22 years now. Yeah. It's just been a privilege to have been here, both as a teacher, because I was still a teacher when I arrived here, and then later went into administration.
Oh, excellent. And how would you say your approach has changed in these years to teaching and administrating? Because I can say, myself being a graduate of Kgaswe High School, that your approach is very, how shall I say, you don't try to micromanage people. Like, your hair should be like this, your shoes should be like that, your tie should be done up like this. Of course, there are rules. I mean, we have a uniform at school and what have you. But I believe this is still the case. I could stand corrected that in Kgaswe, boys are allowed to wear studs. They are allowed to wear earrings. They're allowed to have cornrows. And if their hair gets as long as mine, then the only requirement is that they tie it. And of course, I always had a beard, of course, out of religious reverence, but of course, others also grew their beards and so on and so forth. And this might seem it comes as a shock to many people that this is an international school and we allow all this to happen. But the crux of the matter is, I've spoken to a lot of people outside and a lot of former teachers of Kgaswe, and they always have one thing to say, is that the students at Kgaswe were the best behaved. And I believe it ties in directly to this lack of micromanaging people and allowing them to really be themselves and see the folly in some of their actions by their own account. Was this you from the beginning when you started teaching, or is that something that you developed later on, maybe after you came to Botswana?
You know, if I seriously have to think about it, I think in a way, or in a sense, it must be from how I was raised, because The schools that we went to during the apartheid era were very militaristic. We had to walk on the left-hand side with your bag in your right hand. If you're a boy and your hair touched your ears, you got a hiding. It was that serious. And of course, later on in life, then you accept it. I mean, it's the norm, and you don't step out of it because you don't want to get a hiding. But later in life, you start thinking, does it really matter? It doesn't, because it's the person, it's the human being. I must tell you a little story of a cricket tour from Westwood. I was at Westwood International School, as you well know, and we took a cricket tour to Australia, and there were quite a few boys who had long hair and had to tie it in a ponytail when they were playing, because otherwise their hair would be in their faces. And it was strange on the way back at Sydney Airport. I found a rugby tour, a rugby team that were also on the same flight as ours, and those boys had been with me in South Africa, and there, of course, it was still then short back and sides, and they couldn't help commenting on these kids of today wearing their hair like that, and don't you have problems with discipline, and serious questions like that.
Wow.
And the more I tried, they just balked at me. They couldn't believe that this could happen. Where does it come from? I realized after a while, as I said, that appearance, yes, is important. But to restrict students too much makes them rebellious. You have to give them something to understand that they can also think. They can make decisions for themselves. I shall very well remember the first new parent evening we had at Kgaswe, and I was asked this question. We here, was the one parent, that you allow boys to plait their hair. I said, yes, why not?
I was there, just so you know. I was head boy at the time, and I was at the back. I was cautiously observing. But anyway, you may proceed.
Yeah, and I could feel the resistance from at least 90% or 80%, perhaps I'm exaggerating, of the audience in front of me, that, what is going to happen to our school? I'm sure that was the question in everybody's mind. This school is going downhill because of the liberal thoughts of this new head at this school. And then the question was asked, will you allow studs for boys in their ears? And my answer was, yes, of course. How can I prevent them from putting studs in their ears if the girls are allowed to? And I think that for the children, certainly, gave them the message, we will be allowed. The other thing, of course, and there must be another side of this coin, is the expectation. For years and many years in my life as an educator, I've believed that it's about expectations. If you're a homeroom teacher, for instance, if you expect your students to be sitting down at 7:15 in the morning, because that's when we start, you expect they'll be there. If you expect students to behave in a certain way, they will behave in a certain way. And Mos, you will recall that my one little phrase that I still repeat to every single parent and student that I interview is, we expect the boys to behave like gentlemen and the girls to behave like ladies.
Absolutely.
And the rest falls into place. You don't need to publish lists of mistakes and transgressions that students can do. I mean, you cannot do that. So what you commented on was Kgaswe students had this reputation when they come in contact with other schools, when we travel. The principals of the other schools will comment on, your kids are so well behaved. And you will recall, Mos, I never forced students to behave well. I expected them to behave well. I expected them to be proud of their school and make everybody proud.
Yeah.
And that is so important. It's all about expectations, and I cannot repeat this more than I'm doing.
Of course.
And that made my life a pleasure as well, because I did not need to be this policeman. I did not need to be this dictator. I am absolutely positive that dictators can't sleep at night, because they have to think of the next way of enforcing people to do things, or forcing people to do things, rather than expecting them and expecting that it will happen.
Of course.
If I can move on from students to teachers as well. I was a teacher for most of my life and an administrator only in the last section. And for me, the principles that stood out were the principles that allowed you to be yourself, that allowed you to live your subject, that did not check on you all the time, that did not expect lists and tick lists and whatever every single day, but gave you the freedom to be who you are and to transfer the knowledge in your specific way, because we're all different. We all know that people learn differently, so why can't people teach differently as well? And then the results will come.
Of course, and it's interesting you mentioned that. In the Islamic tradition, when you talk about Islamic knowledge, of course, nowadays you've got the internet and what have you, and of course, definitely we can do a lot of research, but there's still this emphasis on having a link to a physical teacher, this human link, because not only do they impart on you the knowledge from the books and the Quran, what have you, but also their personality, their characteristics, and their mannerisms, the way, their etiquette, their way of speaking, the way of respecting people of different backgrounds and different opinions. And it's amazing that the more we analyze every facet of knowledge that we have on the earth, the more it just seems to come back to the same place. You realize that knowledge is such a vast ocean, but it all has a common thread running through it at the same time. And if we can bounce on that, you are someone who has had immense respect, I would say, myself being one of the Muslim students of Kgaswe, that has had immense respect for all religions, all creeds, all people from all sorts of walks of life. I mean, I would say that definitely, not to, bag on anyone who came before you or whoever's going to come after you, but I always felt that there was this element of you having respect, immense respect, and shall I say a bit of curiosity for those of other faiths and other creeds and other walks of life, people who just had a different way of approaching problems and looking at life in general. Is that also something that you developed along the way?
Certainly. When I grew up, all Russians were the enemy. In South Africa, they talked of the red danger from Russia. You grow up with the idea or with the perception that all Jews have big noses. And, the day comes when you realize that it's only a perception.
Yeah.
For me, so important to understand the other person is to get to know the person.
Of course.
If I know you well enough, and I mean, Mos, I've known you now for 9 years, I don't see what you look like. I know the person. I know Mos and what he can accomplish and what he can achieve. I know that, and I know the person, and we've shared many thoughts, I'm sure, in the past.
Yeah.
And similarly with any child from any background, doesn't matter where they come from, who they are, as soon as you know the person, you don't think of the color or the religion or the creed or whatever they are. It's the person that matters. And if we all look at it that way, then this life would be such a beautiful place to live in, because we all grow up. Can I tell you a story about my sister's son?
Please do.
He was about 5 years old in Standard 1, 6 years old in Standard 1, in a private school in South Africa. And it was in those days already, because it was a private school, they accepted black students and Indian students or whatever the case may be. And he had a little friend come and play over in the afternoon. So my sister picked both of them up and took them home, and they had a sandpit in front of the house. And they were playing there with their little cars or whatever the case may be. And then 5 o'clock came, and the boy's father drove up the driveway. My sister was standing behind the two boys. They didn't know that she was there. And he drove up in the driveway because she'd opened the gate for him. And he got out of the car. And Dirk, that's her little Snow White son, said to his friend, "I didn't know your father was black."
Okay.
That perception that when you're that age, none of us see the difference. It's only later that we are influenced, indoctrinated, if you wish,
Of course, yes.
to have certain beliefs about certain people and who they are and what they are. And we all know that that's wrong. But in the world we live in, unfortunately, a lot of it gets lost. We don't see that empathy with another person unless we know the person.
And it's sad that modern politics seems to be taking a lot of this bias into stride and basically taking it to the next level. I mean, with fearmongering and what have you in modern politics, it's sad really that we can't see past appearances and what we hear about certain groups of people instead of actually judging them for what they are themselves. I mean, because it's really funny that people try to group all, let's say, all white people, all black people into one single group. That's absurd, because every individual has got their, as we mentioned earlier, rebellious characteristics. Everyone wants to go away from the herd every now and again. Everyone wants to give their own breath of life into this world, if I will. So, yeah, it's really funny that people try to look for ways of, first of all, dividing us, and second of all, I was listening to one of my teachers from the UK, from Birmingham recently, and he said that never in history have humans been so insecure about their identity. I mean, previously, if you were, for example, you were a Turk, that was that. But today, no, everyone has to be, I mean, this comes out in England a lot. I mean, yes, I am British, but I'm also Pakistani from my parents' side. And blah, 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 blah. And everyone has to be like this instead of just sharing the commonalities we have. And yes, I agree that, you know, in many ways, there are those differences that we have that must be celebrated. But also, why can't we just spend more time sharing the commonalities between us and enjoying life for what it is?
Absolutely true. Before I came to Botswana, I had very, very little contact with the Muslim faith. I met the first Muslims really face to face when I moved to Botswana, and then realized that they're just like people like us. They are exactly the same. I shall never forget Mos. When Mr. Smith, you will remember, and his wife did a play at the school, and Mos was in the band, and Mos's face was dark lines, and I don't know, under his eyes it was dark. I thought, he's a Muslim, he's not supposed to do that. Only later on to realize that, of course, you know, it's not because he's a Muslim that he's not allowed to do this, because we have this perception that Muslims are isolated, that they isolate themselves and they don't communicate and they can't be themselves, and only to discover that it's the opposite is actually true.
Yeah.
We share the same religion. I mean, I'm Dutch Reformed, raised, but I mean, the Old Testament and Islam, they have so much in common. I mean, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are our forefathers from that side.
Of course, yes.
For everybody.
Of course.
And if one goes back to that time and then realize, yeah, we're only human.
Of course, yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned all that about me. Maybe if I feel like it, I'll put a picture of myself from back in the days.
I think that'll be a good idea.
Yeah, and okay, I might get refuted, but not like I care about all that. I always mention on this podcast that I am very controversial. My superpower is giving people heart attacks without me doing anything. But I guess you could also attest to that. I mean, I don't want to put a plug in for myself, but I've always been like, this is everyone else and I am over there. That's always how I've prided myself. But anyway, coming back to teaching, what specifically motivated you to, well, when you were here, you definitely taught English, literature, and anything that followed that sort of line. So what motivated you to get into this line of teaching instead of, I don't know, maths?
Maths, definitely not. I was never strong at maths. I think at my ripe old age, I still have nightmares of writing a maths exam. Mathematics was definitely not on. As I said, my first choice would have been veterinary science, although I'm colorblind and of course not strong enough in maths really to have accomplished that. And then, of course, my next choice was drama. But my father said, sorry, son, I'm not going to look after you until you're 40. Find something else where you can make a decent living. And then teaching came up. And in an Afrikaans environment in South Africa, we spoke English and Afrikaans at home. My mother's surname was Adcock. So we read widely and spoke the language as well. And it just went from there that I would go into the teaching of English. And I loved it, of course, loved literature since childhood. My parents introduced us to literature very, very soon in our lives and told us many stories. So, in effect, being a teacher, you can actually practice your drama as well.
Definitely.
And especially an English teacher, because you would be doing literature and you would have Shakespeare and poetry and whatever, and be able to live the dream. And as soon as I discovered that, in my very first practical that I had to do as a student in my second year, I just loved it. I just enjoyed teaching the language and making it come alive for students. Obviously, there were the struggles, because some students could not speak 2 words of English. But at least if after the year or 2 or 3 years that you've been teaching them, if they leave with a little bit more confidence and a love of the language, then, I've accomplished something.
Definitely.
I shall never forget the first class that I taught at Kgaswe, and it was Mos, your class.
Yeah.
And I inherited the literature class.
Yes, I remember that.
And I enjoyed every single minute of it.
Wow.
There was one boy, is it Mosupi?
Yes, Mosupi.
Yes, he was in the class. He was not very keen on literature, but he did the subject and he passed it.
Definitely.
So did everybody else, B's and A's. I think there was quite a number of them. And
Of course, yeah.
for me, that was just wonderful to have come here and made literature come alive for the students. As an administrator, I used to teach 1 or 2 periods a week then. But those were the best times, because when you close the door behind you when you're going to teach a class, nobody can disturb you. When you're the principal, there's a knock at your door all the time if you don't leave the door open. So I really enjoyed those moments that I could do that.
Definitely. And what is your approach to people? I'm also, as you will testify, a literature enthusiast.
Yeah.
I love the English language and I love immersing myself in books and all sorts of art forms. But there are people who, it's not that they don't speak English. They've been speaking English all their lives, but they could care less about books or Shakespeare and all these things. They could care less about art. We've discussed this before. It's almost as if a lot of people today are blinded by science. And look, we're not bagging on anyone who genuinely has a passion for that and wants to pursue that as their path in life. But a lot of people, you can see with their results and what they're doing at school that they would be better suited as a lawyer, for example, or even someone who studies English and becomes a playwright, for example. But no, because of societal pressure, because being a doctor or an engineer is the only way out of life, it's the only respectable profession, then they get swayed in that direction. How would you approach that? I mean, of course, you can't force anyone to do anything, but surely you must have picked up a few tricks and something along the way.
Yes, whether I've picked up any tricks, I wouldn't know. But you are absolutely right. And it's pressure mostly from home and from communities that we have to have a doctor in the family. And lo and behold, one of the children will become a doctor, be it a boy or a girl. The number of students from Kgaswe that study medicine, I think, must be the highest percentage in any school that I've ever come across. Because our students go and study medicine all over the world, really. Some in Zambia, some in China, some in Australia, and of course here in Botswana now that we have a medical school as well.
Yeah.
One of our Kgaswe students, I think, is now 4th year at Wits University in South Africa and doing very well.
Wow.
It is frustrating because to tell parents and students that you're going to be able to make a living by becoming a playwright is a difficult thing to convince them, because you don't know. When you're a doctor, you give a prescription and you get money for it.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about. And it shouldn't, because I feel so sad for so many students that have to go into the sciences and don't necessarily want to go into the sciences. Yeah. They have the ability, yes, but they've also got the ability to do very well in other areas as well. And on a few occasions now, students here who've indicated that they wanted to go and become medical doctors, I sat them down and I ask them, close your eyes. Can you really see yourself standing next to a patient, an old, frail patient who have no control over their bladder or whatever the case may be, and you have to treat that patient? Do you really see yourself having that empathy? Because you cannot enjoy your job if you don't have empathy with the patient, if you don't really have the passion for helping people. It's not about proving to other people that I have the brains to become a doctor. You must have that passion and that empathy with people to be able to do that. Similarly with a nurse or a physiotherapist. If you want to become a physiotherapist, you must be comfortable with handling other people's body parts.
Yeah.
And many people are not. But if you become a physiotherapist, it's a high-paying job. Okay, fine. Then do it if you have that passion to help and assist people. But the arts certainly presently, I don't know whether it's worldwide, but certainly in Botswana at the moment, a low second when it comes to the choice of opportunities. I don't know, where directions to go. Jobs, I suppose, is the word that sums it up.
Well, yeah, and this is also where I should be grateful for my open-minded parents who, despite my lineage stemming from the South Indian subcontinent, they are quite open-minded. Although there were other people in the, shall I say, the Muslim community, once I finished at Kgaswe and I made my plans public that I'm going to study law, gave me a lot of, I don't know if I should use that word in public, but gave me a lot of crap, I should say, for wanting to diverge from my father's chosen path and basically wanting to do something new, although it was quite respectable. I mean, being a lawyer is also still something seen as being one of the elites, and I can tell you that it's a hell of a job, a hell of a nightmare compared to anything I studied at school. I mean, it's one of the most difficult degrees to get a first class in. I mean, that should speak volumes on its own. But yeah, I guess I should also be thankful for my bad grades in science and maths at this point. But yeah, a lot of people, they don't have the same luxuries as myself. Either it's from the parents or either their grades are so good everywhere, so the parents kind of rest them into that direction. They don't have an excuse that, oh, my grades in science and maths are bad. But yes, it is sad that, yeah, it looks like a worldwide thing that everyone just wants to be a doctor or an engineer or something instead of pursuing the arts. And you see, with the arts as well, I guess it's not something you can take someone's ideas and then keep surviving on that. You have to always innovate. If I want to be an award-winning playwright right now, today, I can't just rip off Shakespeare and expect to succeed. In fact, that's the end of my career. I have to come up with new ideas that are relevant for today's time, relevant for today's audience, and also something that tells a story, but in an intricate, artful form. So I guess there's just so many barriers to being a successful art student, I guess, but that shouldn't dissuade anyone. That shouldn't put people back from achieving their full potential, because our parents' generation, their goal in life was survival, but ours is self-actualization. And if you're going to live life with all these regrets stemming up in you and live a life that's very depressing and not one that you're proud of, this is going to leak into your relationships in the future, your wife, your kids, and your grandkids even. I mean, no one wants a grumpy old grandpa, do they?
They want a grandpa that can spoil them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I don't know how we can change it now in Botswana. If we can just, go in a slightly other direction with this as well. In my office, I have, and I still have, and I had many young graduates in the sciences, not medicine, but in the sciences, who were just looking for something to do. They had graduated, but there are no jobs for them. And I think the Botswana government should really, get a task team together to start analyzing and finding out exactly what the country needs. Jobs we do need, but we cannot train students for jobs that don't exist. Cool. And I'm going to use an example that is quite extreme. Last year, there was a young gentleman in my office, very, very bright, who did so well that the government sponsored him to do his A-levels at Cambridge in the UK. He did so well in his A-levels that they sponsored him to study aeronautical engineering at Cambridge University, which he completed. And then he came to Botswana. And what kind of job does he do in Botswana with an aeronautical engineering degree? He wanted to go and work overseas. There were job offers.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, with the present system in place, they could not sign him off the 7 years that they'd sponsored him. So he has to stay in Botswana for that. And that to me is criminal. I don't know where it is. I don't know all the details. But this example came to me. And I want to emphasize that he's not the only one. There are so many kids, young people, walking around here with degrees, and they can't find jobs because there are no relevant jobs for their qualifications. And I think we need to look at that. On the other hand as well, Botswana students, young Botswana, the youth, should realize that an office job is not for everyone. And there won't be office jobs for everyone. They have to be able to put their hands out and get them dirty and do other jobs like plumbing, like electrician, not IT technicians, because there are hundreds of them walking around, but those where you need. What about motor mechanics? I mean, I haven't seen a motor mechanic in Botswana since I've been here is a Motswana. They're all foreigners. And they have the skills and to help people. I mean, in Palapi, certainly. There are about 8 or 10 that I know of, but not one of them is a Botswana. Why don't Botswana students realize that they can also make a living through becoming motor mechanics? And there are institutions that train them.
Of course.
They do, but I don't know what happens to the students, because the one student I know of walked out of there, now wants his own company and people to work for him. He's not prepared to go and work for 5 years and really know how the job works. And we need to try and get our young people to realize that there are other jobs than lawyers, IT technicians or IT experts, because we're saturated with students. I mean, they come and ask for jobs all the time. And there simply aren't enough jobs for them. I mean, every second person these days can help themselves anyway. But we need to guide our students, our Botswana students, specifically, that they must think of other jobs. We need them. We absolutely need them. Just another example. There's one plumber in Palapi. He's in his 50s. He's Malawian. He's the only one who really knows about plumbing in Palapi. And this is a big town. And then the lodges around, they bring him in to go and work for them for 3 months to put in the water systems for them. And then we in Palapi, we don't know who to call. There's a vast vacuum for young Botswana in that sense. Plumbers, we need them. It's essential. Everybody has water that's running to their house in Botswana, and we need those. That's just an example. Sorry, I'm rambling on now.
No, it's okay, but I think it's important to realize that even if you go down this route, your fate is not sealed. It's not like you'll be a plumber until the day you die. There's always opportunity to expand and do something else, or even get into an office ultimately once you have figured your way out of the system here and there. I'm sure you'd agree with that. I mean, this is just something to get you off the ground and get those bucks rolling in, because let's be frank, we live in a capitalist society. You can hardly do anything without money these days. But anyway, going on from that, you've been teaching for 49 years, was it?
Yes.
And you've come basically to the end. What is next for Mr. Kleynhans?
Exciting times.
Okay.
Yeah, Elmarie, my wife, who's, by the way, is a Standard 1 teacher, we are going to work at a lodge, come ranch, in the Tuli block. Excellent. We've been offered positions there. Wow. And, I mean, you can imagine at my age, to be offered a posh job like that is just unthinkable. We are incredibly excited. Elmarie is going to start a small school. She says she's only going to teach from 9 to 12 because that's all the time she needs to teach little kids to read and learn.
Yeah.
She's very excited about that. She will also be involved in the admin section of the lodge. I jokingly say I'm going to be chief cook and bottle washer. I'm thankfully not going to be in charge, so the ultimate responsibility is not mine. I'm going to assist with the daily snag lists for maintenance. I'm going to be involved in the designing, layout, planting of the new gardens because the lodge is expanding, more or less double what it is at the moment. Basically, there are two lodges next to each other.
Wow.
The one caters more for the conferences and the other one caters for people from overseas, visitors from overseas. I'm also going to have the opportunity to take these visitors and guests on game drives. Nature conservation, as you know, is a passion of mine.
Of course.
I feel very, very strongly about that. And one of my hobbies is photography. So I'm going to have the opportunity to work on that as well and enjoy the freedom of being paid to do what I love and what I like.
That does sound like a dream come true in many ways, but could you tell us a bit more about nature conservation? I mean, in our private conversations, you've always mentioned how it seems that very few people are actually aware of what to do and what not to do when it comes to wildlife in general. Not even wildlife, even everyday animals, if I can call them that, such as snakes, which, I mean, maybe there's someone outside of Botswana watching. No, we don't ride lions to work and all that kind of jazz, but snakes are kind of common depending on the season. But your approach is that killing them shouldn't be the answer, well, killing every single one that you see and stuff like that. So if you could elaborate on that, that would be great.
Yeah. I don't know how many hours you've got. Let's go to snakes. The general perception, belief, if you wish, in Botswana is that if you see a snake, you kill it. You don't ascertain whether it's poisonous or harmless. You kill it because it's a snake, simply because it's a snake. In my small environment here at Kgaswe, I'm trying to educate students and everybody, the workers here as well, by the way, that you don't kill a snake. You either capture it or move away from it. There are very poisonous snakes. I'm sure that we all should be very careful of them. The cobras, yes, they are, but they wouldn't chase you, as people would say. The snake that one really needs to be afraid of here, and we don't see that many of them, is the black mamba. They are very fast, and they are snakes that if they bite you, your chances of survival are not very good. But 99% of the snakes that are killed are basically harmless. Because we live in Botswana, snakes are common. In my yard, I've picked up puff adders, I've Mozambican spitting cobras, and I would never kill them. You capture them. And it's not that difficult for an inexperienced person. If you've got a wall and you put your dustbin against the wall, they will invariably climb in there. You just flip it over and they can't get out. And you put the lid on and go and drop it somewhere else. Because we've got the bush close by, we can do that. My gardener the other day came to me very proudly saying that he'd killed the snake that caught my birds. My birds hadn't been caught, by the way. And it was a Kalahari sand snake. It's about 35 centimeters long, totally harmless. The teeth are rudimentary. And he was very upset that I was upset because I was livid to see this harmless little snake being killed because it's the enemy. A lot of education needs to happen as far as nature conservation is concerned in this country. And I can start from the very beginning, but I mean, that's just one example. Thank goodness Botswana has got large game reserves.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for that, because more and more we see that outside those game reserves, our wildlife is being decimated. And I'm not talking about kudu and eland and impala. I'm talking skunks, bat-eared foxes, rabbits. We don't have rabbits, hares, being killed by packs of village dogs. And you don't see them anymore. In 1993, when I visited Botswana for the first time, you still saw roadkill, skunks and bat-eared foxes and mongooses. But you don't see them anymore because they've all been killed by specifically the village dogs, these packs of dogs that the young guys go out into the bush and then kill everything else. Thank goodness, as I say, we have the sanctuaries and these animals are there aplenty, which is absolutely wonderful.
Oh, that's great. So what tips and tricks, what advice would you give to the common man listening to this podcast on how he can make his little small impact in the land of nature conservation? Would it be not to kill snakes, or is there something more practical?
Well, I wish I could say to everybody, read, and find out about these animals. But before you decide to kill any animal, scorpion, spider, snake, whatever it is, because those are the small things that come into our houses and then are around in our yards, think before you just kill it.
Of course. Yeah.
Try to capture it if possible. If it's a scorpion, first make sure what kind it is, because there are two kinds. The ones with the thick tails and the small claws are the poisonous ones. The ones with the big claws and the thin tails are not that poisonous. But those you can always coax into a waste paper basket with a piece of paper and flip it into the waste paper basket and go and let it go in the bush. Be aware of the small things. Don't just kill to kill. Whenever somebody comes and says that they've got bees in their house, the first thing is, eradicate them, kill them. Yes, they can be dangerous. We all know that. But first find out whether there isn't somebody around that can come and capture them before you take them away. We all know that the bee has been declared the most valuable being on this earth.
Absolutely.
If there were no bees in this world, we would not be here, because nothing would be pollinated and we would not have food to eat, and especially if we chose to be vegan.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, that was jokingly.
Well, yeah, so I think that illustrated properly, or very definitely, how we can actually take small steps towards this giant goal of nature conservation. So to wrap this up, do you have any parting words for our audience in regards to anything that we discussed today, whether it be teaching, reading, nature conservation?
I have to think, because it covers such a large and such a wide field.
Oh, definitely.
Yes, 49 years in education is a long time. But my advice to anybody who follows a career, first of all, make sure that it's the career that you really want. Like Mos has chosen to become a lawyer.
Yeah.
I chose to become an English teacher. And then enjoy it. Put your passion, put your life, put everything into it, and you will be paid back abundantly. I can say, like Edith Piaf, I have no regrets. Yes, there were the difficult times, of course. We all experience that. But then we appreciate the good times even more. But certainly, go out there and enjoy life. And eat well, eat healthy, and exercise.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we could have an entire episode dedicated to that on its own. But yeah, and we'll end off on this personal question. Well, it's personal to me. Would you be surprised to see me as the principal of Kgaswe in like 30 years or so?
Not at all. Not at all. I think he'll make a very good principal.
Well, I'll definitely put to use many things that I learned from you. And I always say that as much as I try to leave this place, I've left too much of myself in here to not come back again and again. I mean, I graduated in 2013. We're almost in 2020 now, and yet here I am. But anyway, Mr. Kleynhans, it's been an absolute joy speaking to you about a variety of subjects. I hope this won't be the last. Definitely we'll come see you in Tuli block and have more in-depth conversations about what you're doing that side as well. Thank you very much for coming onto the show, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right. So that was Mr. Jannie Kleynhans, the former principal at Kgaswe International High School. Hope you guys learned something and enjoyed. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you.